All right, welcome to the deep dive. We know we love getting your requests, and you guys have sent in some really fascinating material this time.
Yeah, this is a big one.
It is. It's a deep dive, that's for sure. Lots of stuff about Soviet Union, 20th century, you know the deal,
Yeah, some pretty heavy stuff too, gotta say.
for sure, for sure. But that's why we're here, right? To really take a close look at all of this, try to figure out what it all means.
Absolutely. And you've given us a lot to work with. Purges, the Romanovs, famines, the KGB. We even have stuff on Chernobyl, the siege of Leningrad, the gulags.
Oh, and Rasputin, always a wild card.
Can't forget Rasputin. And then, bringing it closer to our time, the Kursk submarine disaster. It's a lot to unpack.
It is. But I think our mission here, as always, is to uncover the human stories within these huge historical events. What was it like to actually live through these times?
Exactly. We're not just reciting dates and names. We're trying to understand the human impact, the choices people made, the consequences they faced.
Right. So with that in mind, should we just dive right in?
Let's do it.
Okay. We got to start with Stalin, right? I mean, the Great Purge, those years from like 1936 to 1938, just the sheer scale of it is hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah. And what's really chilling, looking at your sources here, is how utterly indiscriminate it was. We tend to think of purges as targeting political opponents, but this went so much deeper.
Oh, for sure. Loyal citizens, military leaders, intellectuals, peasants, even people within the Communist Party itself. No one was safe.
Right. It's like this atmosphere of suspicion just permeated every level of society. And the accusations were so broad: treason, sabotage, espionage, basically a blank check to eliminate anyone they saw as a threat.
And the methods, I mean, wow. Mass arrests were happening constantly, followed by these super fast, often secret trials. And sometimes no trial at all. People just disappeared.
Yeah, and your material mentions these execution quotas, which is just horrifying. Imagine being an official who's given a specific number of people to eliminate.
It's just mind-boggling. And you have to wonder about the long-term effects, right? Living under that kind of constant fear, the betrayal, the not knowing who to trust.
Oh, absolutely. The psychological impact must have been devastating. I mean, not only were they eliminating people, but they were also creating this culture of fear and self-censorship that lasted for decades.
Makes you think, doesn't it? About the fragility of freedom, the power of fear.
Oh, no.
Okay, well, from one brutal end to another, we've got to talk about the Romanovs, their execution in July 1918. Really feels like the end of an era.
Yeah,
Over 300 years of Romanov rule just gone.
yeah. And looking at these accounts, the brutality of it is striking. Tsar Nicholas II, his wife Alexandra, all five of their children, they were murdered in a basement in Yekaterinburg.
By Bolshevik guards.
Right, and your sources describe it as this really chaotic scene. Bullets, bayonets. It wasn't a clean, dignified execution. It was messy, brutal.
And then they tried to cover it up, right? Secret burial, decades of silence of what really happened. It wasn't until the 90s that most of their remains were even identified.
It really shows you how the new regime wanted to completely erase the past, start fresh, with no connection to the old order.
So from the end of one era to the beginning of another really dark chapter, we have to talk about the Holodomor, the famine that hit Ukraine between 1932 and 1933. The material you guys sent is just heartbreaking.
Yeah, and what makes it even more tragic is that this wasn't some natural disaster. The evidence is pretty clear that this was a direct result of Stalin's policies.
Right, the forced collectivization of agriculture, taking away land from individual farmers, forcing them into these collective farms. It completely disrupted food production.
Exactly. And then they sealed the borders. People couldn't escape. Any aid from outside was blocked. It was basically a man-made famine.
And millions died.
Yeah.
Millions. The sources you sent describe people eating grass, tree bark, even turning to cannibalism out of desperation. It's almost unimaginable.
And what's even more disturbing is that this wasn't just incompetence. Many scholars believe that this was deliberate, a way to crush Ukrainian nationalism, to break their spirit.
It's so horrific. And even today, there's this debate about whether it's genocide. The Soviet Union always denied it, of course. But the evidence is pretty damning.
It's a reminder of how history can be manipulated, how the truth can be suppressed.
Okay. Shifting gears a bit, let's talk about something else that was shrouded in secrecy. The KGB's secret prisons. These weren't just regular prisons, right?
No, not at all. This was about something else entirely. Think of it as a vast network of hidden places where people simply vanished. Suspected dissidents, anyone deemed a threat to the state.
And once you were in, there was no telling what would happen to you.
Right. Torture was routine, sleep deprivation, mock executions, psychological torment. They really perfected the art of breaking people.
And the worst part? The families never knew. They would just disappear. No explanation. Just silence.
It's like this constant agonizing uncertainty, not knowing if your loved one was alive or dead, where they were, what was happening to them, just awful.
And the KGB's reach went far beyond the Soviet borders, right?
Yeah.
They were involved in assassinations, spying, all sorts of covert operations around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a global network of fear and intimidation, and the legacy of that is still felt in many parts of the world today.
Okay, let's talk about World War II, specifically the Battle of Stalingrad, one of the most brutal battles in human history. And the tactics used by the Soviets, well, they were shocking, to say the least.
Yeah, the human wave attacks, basically sending waves of soldiers, often poorly armed, straight into German machine guns. It was just horrific.
And there was this famous order, right? Not one step back. Retreat was punishable by death. So these soldiers were basically trapped between the enemy and their own commanders.
It was a brutal calculus, and the casualties were staggering. Over 1 million Soviet soldiers died at Stalingrad. But they did eventually win, and it was a turning point in the war.
But at what cost?
Yeah.
Right, really makes you think about the nature of war, the decisions made, the sacrifices demanded.
I mean, can you imagine the desperation, the fear those soldiers must have felt?
Okay, moving on to another event
Yeah.
with massive consequences. Chernobyl.
Yeah.
The nuclear meltdown in April 1986. It exposed some serious flaws in the Soviet system, didn't it?
Oh, yeah. Their initial response was a disaster in itself. Secrecy, denial, a complete unwillingness to admit the scale of the problem. They even delayed the evacuation of Pripyat, the nearby city.
It took them 36 hours to evacuate Pripyat. Can you imagine?
It's incredible, isn't it? And then, of course, you have the first responders. Firefighters, plant workers. They were sent in with little to no protection. Many of them died horrific deaths from radiation poisoning.
And the long-term consequences are still being felt today. Cancer rates, birth defects, contaminated land. It's a stark reminder of the dangers of nuclear power and the importance of transparency.
And you know, the crazy thing is, they might have gotten away with covering it up if it hadn't been for those international monitoring stations. They picked up the radiation spike and forced the Soviets to come clean.
It shows you that you can't hide from reality forever, no matter how hard you try. Another incredibly harrowing chapter from this era, the Siege of Leningrad. 872 days. That's almost 2.5 years of being trapped by the Nazis, cut off from the outside world.
The conditions were absolutely unimaginable. Freezing cold, no food, constant bombardment. People were burning furniture, books, anything they could find just to stay warm. They even boiled wallpaper paste for food.
And there are accounts of cannibalism. It's just horrifying. But what's amazing is that they never surrendered. They held on, somehow, through sheer willpower and resilience.
Yeah, it's a testament to the human spirit, isn't it? To be able to endure that kind of suffering and still find a way to resist.
But the cost was immense. Over 1 million people died during the siege. And even afterwards, the Soviet government tried to downplay the suffering, control the narrative.
It's another example of how they tried to manipulate history, to hide the true cost of their ideology.
Okay. From a city under siege, let's move on to another dark chapter. The gulags. This vast network of forced labor camps spread across Siberia. They weren't just prisons, were they?
No, they were much worse than that. The gulags were basically death sentences. Millions of people were sent there for all sorts of reasons. Political prisoners, religious figures, anyone deemed an enemy of the state.
And the conditions were just brutal. Extreme cold, starvation, backbreaking labor. It was basically a system designed to crush people, both physically and mentally.
And if you died there, well, you were just another statistic. Buried in an unmarked grave, forgotten by the world.
And what's really chilling is that these camps were a key part of the Soviet economy. They relied on this forced labor to build infrastructure, extract resources, all sorts of things.
It's like this dark underbelly of their whole system built on the suffering of millions.
Makes you really question the whole idea of progress, doesn't it? What it's built on, who pays the price?
It's a question we should always be asking.
Okay, let's take a bit of a detour now and talk about someone who almost seems like a character out of a fairy tale. Grigory Rasputin, this mystical, controversial figure who had this incredible influence over the Tsar and his family.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story. He was the self-proclaimed holy man who somehow gained the trust of Tsarina Alexandra, mainly because he seemed to be able to help her son Alexei, who had hemophilia.
But he was also this incredibly divisive figure. Lots of rumors about his debauchery, his influence over political decisions. He became a symbol of everything people hated about the Tsarist regime.
And his death was just as dramatic as his life. Poisoned, shot multiple times, and finally drowned in a river. It's almost hard to believe it actually happened.
And in a way, he contributed to the downfall of the Romanovs, didn't he? His presence at court just fueled the public's anger and distrust. It added to this sense that the whole system was rotten.
Yeah, you could say he was a catalyst, in a way. The final straw that broke the camel's back.
Okay, we're going to end this deep dive with something a little bit more recent, but no less tragic. The sinking of the Kursk submarine in 2000.
Oh, man. That was a tough one. A torpedo explosion, 118 sailors trapped underwater. It really exposed some of the ongoing problems within the Russian military.
Yeah, their response was slow, chaotic. They refused international help for days. It felt like they were more concerned with saving face than saving lives.
And in the end, all 118 sailors died. It was a devastating loss and a real blow to Russia's image on the world stage.
I remember watching it on the news, hoping against hope that they would find survivors. But it wasn't meant to be.
It's a reminder that even in the 21st century, things can go terribly wrong, and that sometimes pride and secrecy can have deadly consequences.
So here we are, at the end of our deep dive into the Soviet Union in the 20th century. We've covered a lot of ground, some of it incredibly dark and difficult.
Yeah, it's been heavy, but important, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, the sheer scale of suffering, the loss of life, it's hard to even process. But I think it's vital that we remember these things, that we learn from them.
It's about understanding the human cost of history, right? The choices made, the consequences faced. And it's about recognizing those patterns of power, of secrecy, of how easily things can go wrong.
And I think it's about recognizing the resilience of the human spirit, too. Even in the darkest of times, people found ways to resist, to create, to survive.
Yeah, that's the hope, right? That even in the face of immense suffering, there's always that spark of humanity that refuses to be extinguished.
Well, on that note, I'm going to leave you with one final thought. Looking back at everything we discussed, what do you think are the most important lessons we can learn from this period of history? And how can we apply those lessons to the world we live in today?
That's a big question, and honestly, I don't have all the answers. But I think it's a question we should all be asking ourselves constantly, because history, as we've seen, has a way of repeating itself if we're not careful.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time.